Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Tropics Talk. Plenty to talk about, so let's get to it. Only one show in town, so to say, and that is the newly named Tropical Storm Elsa, swirling in the far eastern tropical Atlantic, moving quickly, headed towards the Lesser Antilles, a storm we will be watching closely as we head into and through the weekend. As indications are, as we'll talk about at length here, this will eventually make a turn to the north, headed in the general direction of the Gulf of Mexico and potentially the Florida Peninsula. But let's start out with the 8 a.m. advisory. Winds 40 miles per hour, so right on the edge of that tropical storm threshold, moving quickly for a tropical storm to the west at 25 miles per hour. Now, in general, as I switch over and we can sort of dive in more to the satellite presentation or to the radar here in Southwest Florida to start. There we go. IR full disk, and here we are out in the Eastern Caribbean. Hope I didn't make anybody seasick. There is the latest look at Elsa on the satellite presentation. As I go through this, you'll note you're seeing a little bit of a collapsing of that thunderstorm activity. I'll put that into motion for you. That lapse will slow it down a little bit. And yeah, you know, for a truly healthy tropical system, this is what I'm watching, this area right here. You'd expect to see sort of a concentric circle to the thunderstorm activity right over the low-level center. You're not seeing that right now. In fact, you're seeing, I think, the influence of perhaps some dry air being drawn in towards the center, that little dry slot there. There is some Saharan dust, as we talked about at length yesterday, to the north of this. You're still seeing pretty consistent thunderstorm activity on the south side. You're not seeing a whole lot going on the north side. Perhaps the influence of some shear. What you're also seeing, so I can pause this real quick, see sort of the appearance of that going on. That's the sign of some clockwise upper level outflow starting to go. So now we're seeing indications that this has a pretty healthy core in general. It's bringing in the warm ocean air at the surface, bringing it in. The air rises up, going up in the upper atmosphere, and then venting out with high pressure setting up aloft in that clockwise formation. If it can keep that structure, if it can try to set itself up vertically, stack itself vertically, then it would likely intensify going forward. That is, of course, what the forecast calls for. Now, way more questions than answers as we get into the longer range of the forecast. What we do know for sure is in the near term, this will stay on a pretty steady west-northwesterly path, being steered by the strong Atlantic high-pressure area off to its north. So there we are right now, or at least tomorrow morning. So that strong high pressure, Elsa approaching the Lesser Antilles and riding that on that consistent west-northwesterly track. But, as I just showed you, by the time we get to Sunday, that backs off. And so it's going to give it an opening to turn to the north. Along with that, a front is going to be building into northern and central Florida, and that's going to bring some further southwesterly flow that should sort of grab this and turn it northward. The big question is, when does that turn occur? Look at the spaghetti plots, again, showing pretty consistently, tightly packed together, those lines all showing that strong northwesterly track all the way across the Lesser Antilles until it gets to about Hispaniola, Jamaica, Cuba. That's when things start to diverge a little bit. And I think here's, at least for our purposes in Florida, a very important time. Maybe Sunday. Exactly where does this go? If it stays on a more southerly track, now we're talking this likely going right into the Gulf of Mexico, more of a threat for the northern Gulf Coast. If this shoots the gap, which a number of these models are coalescing on that solution, shoots the gap between Haiti, Jamaica, and goes towards western Cuba, now we're bringing Florida into play, very much so. And there's a few models that show this going further to the north, perhaps even going over Hispaniola. And that would then take it more on an easterly track. But look at the spread in the models once you get out to Tuesday and Wednesday. Yeah, you know, when you look at these spaghetti plots, when they're close together, you have pretty high confidence in the forecast. When they're spread out like this, it's why we call them spaghetti plots. They look like spaghetti on a plate, and you don't have a whole lot of confidence in anything. Right now, you look at 10 different models, they're showing you 10 different tracks in the longer range. And, you know, there's a number of reasons for that. Big part of the reason is that, you know, there's a lot of inhibiting factors as far as its intensity. Now, when we look at the shear, actually not too bad. It's found itself a pocket of low wind shear, but it is moving very quickly off to the west again at 25 miles per hour. So that's sort of undercutting its ability to really establish that circulation. It's moving quickly to the west. It's going to struggle to try to bring the winds back around on its south side. So, yeah, you're not seeing the wind shear being presented when you look at the sort of overall satellite presentation, but its forward motion is going to be a stabilizing factor or a deterrent to its intensity. And along with that, we've been talking about it all along, some very dry air. Now, the driest of the dry air, the core of that Saharan dust, is staying to the north. I'm putting the cone on this to show you sort of how it tracks. It's found a little pocket of moisture in the southern fringes of that, but I still think at times that dry air becomes an influence as it tries to strengthen, as it tries to grow larger in the atmosphere. Of note, though, as we go out in time, as that nears Jamaica, Hispaniola, and Cuba, the worst of the dry air lifts to the north, and that's when I think it would, especially if it survives some of the higher elevations there, it would have a chance to intensify a little bit. And speaking of those high elevations, you know, we talk about this anytime we have a tropical system moving through the Caribbean. There's some high mountaintops on Cuba, 4,000 foot plus on the southern end of the island. High mountaintops, Hispaniola, even some rugged terrain on Jamaica. Any of that could help to disrupt a developing core, especially a small or weaker system like this may be, as it moves its way in. So no surprise when you look at the intensity plots. My goodness, I don't know if I've ever seen, it looks like the Richter scale, looks like a seismograph picking up a earthquake with how much they're jumping up and down with the intensity. Because again, there are so many inhibiting factors. So there's absolutely no certainty whatsoever in the intensity plots, other than most show a gradual strengthening and then something around a strong tropical storm or Category 1 hurricane by the time we get to early next week. And this is either in the Gulf, nearing Florida. It's definitely what the GFS forecast model shows. I'm showing you isobars, or lines of equal pressure. In green is the GFS model. In white is the European. You can clearly make out where the GFS has that center of that storm pinned just to the west of Tampa by 8 a.m. on Wednesday, whereas the European doesn't show it at all. Let's go through that European model forecast, which is not something we can discount entirely, but I don't have a whole lot of faith in this. I think it's worth noting, last year, very active 2020 season, there were a number of storms that the European forecast model was slow to develop, was behind the GFS and many other models on developing the storms and then showing a weaker solution and eventually coming into line with the rest as we got closer to a potential landfall. So I'm not entirely buying this just yet, but it is worth noting, keeps Elsa pretty weak as it moves into the eastern Caribbean Sea and has a more northerly track that would then bring that weak core right over Hispaniola, tearing it apart. And then on the European model solution, the moisture is sort of absorbed into the front that's sitting over northern Florida, and that would be it. Sunday evening, there's no longer any sign on that operational run of Elsa's circulation. Now, that's just one model, one run of the model. When you look at the ensemble, though, most of the members showing a similar thing. Whatever the physics are in the European forecast model, something is saying this stays further to the north, this stays weak, and this goes mainly to the east. Only 2 of the members show this coming over Cuba and moving over Florida. A few of them do keep it sort of on an Isaias-like track off to the east of Florida. But overall, the European not very impressed with Elsa. And then there's the GFS, which has been very consistent, which was a pretty accurate model last season, to be sure. Keeps this as a healthy tropical storm moving across the Lesser Antilles as we go into tomorrow afternoon. With how organized it looks right now on the satellite presentation, I would suspect that's pretty close to ground truth. It keeps it strengthening, keeps deepening that low pressure as it moves across the central Caribbean, brings it close to hurricane strength potentially, right over Jamaica. So on the southern end of those plots I showed you, swings it across Cuba as we go into Monday and Tuesday, and it's sitting just off to the west of southwest Florida by the time we get to Tuesday afternoon. A track for us that looks somewhat similar to what we saw with Ada last November. I don't think it's out of the question. When you look at the ensemble from the GFS, the latest run, again, you look at the operational model, it has been pretty keen on that track right close to Florida, but only a few of those members show that. There's a good many that are way out there in the Gulf of Mexico showing a more southerly track, and then there's a number that are off to the east. So again, there's still a whole lot of uncertainty in that track, and that's why the Hurricane Center shows the forecast in a cone. Again, the width of this cone is determined before the hurricane season even starts. The cone is determined by looking at average forecast error over the last 5 years, and what it says is when the Hurricane Center makes a forecast for the track of the center, by the time you get 5 days out, the center could be anywhere within that cone. It could be all the way out by the Bahamas. It could be all the way off to the north of the western tip of Cuba, or it could be over us here in southwest Florida. And that's why we'll be watching this closely in the coming days. Quick look at some scenarios. If this were to take a track similar to what the GFS showed as I took you through that, we'd still be talking some very heavy rain, likely some gusty winds, rough surf, coastal flooding, similar to what we saw with Eta back in November. And then if it comes a little closer here, perhaps even making direct landfall, now we're talking the full suite of impacts from a strong tropical storm, maybe even a hurricane, including very strong winds, the threat for power outages, the threat for storm surge. If this is coming right onshore, you're going to have a strong onshore component to the winds, and we'll be dealing with storm surge in all likelihood, and then, of course, flooding rainfall. But also not out of the question, on the fringes of that GFS ensemble I just showed you, if this stays to the east of Florida, if this goes way out into the central Gulf of Mexico, well, now here in southwest Florida, we're talking a swing and a miss. We're talking minor impacts at that, outside of maybe some rough surf, occasional gusty squalls here. All on the table, but definitely a storm that we'll be watching closely. And I'll leave you with this. There's still a lot to unpack, still a lot to figure out, because this is still a long, long way away from us. We're talking 2,500 miles, just about, off to the east to southeast, southwest Florida. So here's what I want you to do as we go through the holiday weekend. First things first, think about your hurricane kit. Are you ready to go? You know, if you end up stocking that up, whatever, you have it in place for the rest of hurricane season, even if we don't need it for this particular storm. So good to get that squared away early on anyway, right? Make sure you're keeping tabs on the forecast too. We're going to have frequent updates here on air and online at ABC7 for you, here in Tropics Talk, on air on More in the Morning, and tonight Andrew Adams will be back for you, ABC7 News at 6, 7, and 11 with the latest. So be sure, again, you're tuning in, be sure you're keeping one eye on the forecast. Until next time, I'm meteorologist Jim Dickey. Have a good day.